Hi, I'm Eva Swarzy with Source TV, and today I'm so excited to introduce you to Marina Oberlander. She's a poet, a writer, and a translator. She actually translates Scandinavian and English prose and poetry into Russian. She's a member of the Writers Union of the 21st Century and the Laureate of the International Leonardo da Vinci Prize.
This prize was established by the Union of the Writers of the 21st Century in the beginning of the 90s. And it was given since then to more than 30 people. Every year they give a prize, and it's not given only to poets or writers, but also to artists, to economists, to scientists, and political figures as well. It is very prestigious to be even the nominee of this prize.
Right.
And I got it in 2018, it was said that I'm given this prize for my multiple talent.
That's awesome. And where do you go to receive this prize?
It was given to me in Moscow,
okay.
In the largest bookstore in Moscow. It's called Biblioglobus, and there was a big crowd, and I was awarded this prize when I presented actually my book of translations from Danish. It was a book of translations of the famous Danish poet, a woman, Inger Christensen, who is considered to be the greatest poet of the 20th century.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How did you discover your talent for poetry?
I started to write poetry when I was a little girl. Before I actually started to write it down, some years passed, and the first poem that I wrote down was at school, in the fourth grade, when we were given an assignment to write a composition, the first written poem. Before that, I just loved to rhyme, to sing songs of my own, that I composed in my head.
Right,
I loved poetry very much, and I tried my own.
Right. So you wrote your first poem when you were how old?
About 10.
And what do you write most of your poetry about?
Love.
Oh.
Love, nature. Of course, there is philosophy. A lot of my poetry is philosophical, and it's based on, just inspiration. Right. Of course, I write poetry on some events that happen not necessarily immediately, but I can reflect on them and write, like I wrote a poem about Holocaust in 2009, but it was based on the events that happened in Ukraine, in the little town where I spent my childhood with my grandparents, where 1,500 Jews were buried alive.
Right, right. So do you find when your process of writing the poetry, do you find that you sit down and you just start to write the words, or do you wake up in the middle of the night?
It is absolutely unpredictable. Okay. It's unpredictable. I can go for a walk and bring a poem from a walk.
Okay.
I can, eat my lunch, and suddenly I need to take my notebook and write the lines that came into my head. Sometimes I go to sleep and then I jump out of bed and I go and write some lines so I don't forget them till morning.
I find most of my ideas come in the shower. I don't, most inconvenient because I don't have a pen and paper there to do it. So that's a little better. So what events in your life contributed to your writing? You told me about the Holocaust, that sort of thing, but as a child, was there something that really spoke to you to make you want to continue?
It was mainly about nature, I would say, and about my relations with my parents and especially with my grandfather.
What was your childhood like?
My childhood was very happy. I was one of the happiest persons in my childhood because I was surrounded by people who loved me, and also my aunt. She was a countess, and she spoke 3 languages, and she taught me English and she taught me music. She was my first teacher of music and English when I was 4 years old.
Let's talk about your book. I'm so fascinated with this. You wrote a book called I Simply Have to Fall in Love. What motivated you to write that book? How long did it take?
You know, the idea of publishing my book in English was sitting in my head for a long time, because as I said, I published 3 books of my own poetry already, and they are big books. 2 of them are, you know, like 350 pages, one is 450. Yeah, the books contain poetry and short stories. The first book contained only poetry, and the second and the third contained also prose, because I started to write short stories in 2012. And in 2013, when I published my second book, there were already 8 stories.
Okay.
So it is interesting. The first book, actually, how I published my first book, it was very funny. I became pretty known person as a translator in the Soviet Russia. I translated from Danish, and there were not so many translators from Danish. So I became known, and I was, I got a big recognition when I translated a big book about the history of diplomatic relations between Denmark and Russia that were established in 1492 and never broke. And as you probably know, the mother of the last Tsar, Nicholas II, was Danish, was a Danish princess, Dagmar. So I was offered to translate that book in the beginning of the 90s. I completed the translation, and when the translation was completed, then the Prime Minister of Denmark was invited to Russia by that time Prime Minister of Russia, Chernomyrdin. And Chernomyrdin gave a huge reception, and I was invited, of course. So that gave me recognition. And then I came to the United States. I met my future husband. We started to date. Then we got married in 2000. And I completely forgot about my own poetry. I was so happy that we started to live, we started to travel and whatever. I wrote a little bit, but not so much. And first of all, I decided that I'm not going to translate anything else, that I'm done with translations. So in 2007, I went to Moscow to visit my daughter and her husband, that they were moving from one place to another. And my daughter asked me to look at the library and put everything in order and maybe get rid of some books. So I gave about 2,000 books to Moscow University Library, where I'm a graduate. And but on my way to Moscow, I broke my arm.
Oh.
I broke my wrist. I fell.
Did you fall? Oh, I was going to say, did you fall?
I fell on the plane.
Okay.
On the plane.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and I had to stay in Russia, in Moscow, for a pretty long time, for 5 weeks instead of 2. And at the time, a friend of mine called me. We didn't speak for 10 years because we didn't see each other. And he said that he published his book of poetry. And he said, you should publish your book of poetry. I know that you write poetry. So he took me to the publisher.
Wow.
And that's how my first book was published.
And what year was that?
2008.
Okay.
2008. And immediately after that, I started to collaborate with my composer, because when he saw my book, he said, he wrote 11 songs immediately.
я всегда с тобой, и в одиночестве безбрежно я поцелуй последний твой храню и преданно, и нежно.
Welcome back to Your Source TV. I'm Eva Swarzy with your host, and I'm here today with Marina Oberlander, and we were just talking about her lovely poetry book called I Simply Have to Fall in Love. So my next question to you, Marina, is what does it take to publish a book?
Time and money.
Yeah. How much time?
It took me about a year, because I started to write poetry in English, original poetry in English, in 2018. And I was introduced to a publisher, and she told me that in order to publish a book, I need at least 48 poems. So I wrote, I was writing, I kept writing, and then when the book was almost ready, I inserted also some translations of my own, and also I had a couple of translators who translated my poetry into English. Okay. So that's how this book came, and actually my grandson illustrated it. And this is a very interesting story because the first book that he illustrated was actually the book of Inger Christensen that came out in 2018, and he was doing the illustrations when he was only 6 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he was very excited about it, and the book came out so beautiful that, well, it was the trigger to give me the prize.
That's odd. So when you said he was doing the illustrations, how was he doing that? Was he, I mean, crayons, paint? What
no, he was doing it first. He did by gouache, and then he for my two last books he did acrylic. So he did actually he did 4 books of mine, 2 books of translations, and 2 original books, 1 Russian and 1 English.
So did you ask him what to draw?
Yes, I gave him hints, I gave him lines, I gave him the idea, and he did everything.
And he was 6?
He did everything. And this is actually, he did the cover.
I love it. I really do. I love that. Colors are
and
beautiful.
there are also illustrations in the middle. I think that I will just show you one. For example, this one.
Very curious. Oh, and how old was he when he did that?
Well, he was 8.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's talk about translations now, because it can't be easy to translate from English to other languages. And you translated to Russian, and was that
I translated Danish.
Oh, okay.
Danish into Russian. But my first translation actually happened when I was 14. And I was studying at the English school, and we were given to read the prologue of Hiawatha Song, and I translated it. And that was the beginning of my translation work.
Right.
Yeah, and then, as I said, I decided not to translate anymore, but exactly with this book of Inger Christensen, what happened. I got this book from a friend of mine, and he sent it to me. And he said, maybe you will translate something. When she died in 2009, he sent me this book. And I put it on the shelf and forgot about till 2015. And in 2015, my husband was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh.
And we came home, and this book fell on my head. And I thought it was a sign. I opened it, I started to read it. I immediately translated 11 or 12 poems, and I sent them to my friend, the Dane, the guy who is a specialist in Slavic languages, and he told me, continue. So it took me a long time because there were complications with the rights for the translation and everything. But and the book actually came already after my husband died. So I presented it in Moscow. I went after his funeral. But he saw the script and the illustrations and everything. And I think that this book prolonged his life, at least for a year, because he was given 2 years and he lived 3.5.
Oh, gosh.
And then I translated another book. I was offered, after that book, I was offered to translate a book of a living classic, Also, I was offered to translate about 5-6 poems. I translated 49, the whole book. And this book came out in 2019.
So is it hard to translate the emotion that, because words...
You have to find the clue. Okay. You have to find the clue. You have to, like transform yourself. You have to creep into the soul of the writer.
Okay.
You have to creep into the soul. If you, feel the emotion, you find the clue to this emotion, then it's fine.
Well, you have to have a talent for that, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you do.
Yeah.
How different is the process of translating poetry from one language to another to writing poetry?
Well, translations are done in the morning and own poetry in the dusk.
Oh. Is that true? That's how you do it, or is that just standard practice?
It's not. It's mine.
Yeah. I like your answer, though.
You have to be concentrated. You see, the translation needs more concentration than your own poetry. Your poetry just flows through you. And translation, you have to concentrate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's why I do it in the morning.
Yeah, well, yes, when you're more alert and you're fresh. So let's talk about your animal stories. Yeah.
That my first story was written about my dog. When I lived in Russia, I had a black lab, and I couldn't bring her here. And, I gave it to my cousin, and she was very happy about that because she just bought a country house. And needed a dog, and then I learned that my dog died.
Oh.
And the story just swept out of me. The other animal story is another story that is about the red panda that ran away from the zoo. Of course, I inserted my husband there, and my daughter and my grandson. They are all characters of this story, but the story is based on a real fact.
So are they all the stories in one book, or do you have separate books for them, or how?
The story about my dog is in my second book.
Okay.
And the story, 3 stories about animals. The story about red panda, and 2 stories about cats are in my third book.
And now your grandson, Konstantin, he illustrated for you.
Okay.
I have to ask you about this. You sang the national anthem with the Marine Corps band.
It was the opening of the memorial to the victims of communism.
Okay.
It was in 2007. And
how did that happen? How did you get that?
The person who was the organizer of this event, he knew that I sang. And I sang before at the some reception of Netherlands American Association, and he wanted me to sing the anthem. He asked me if I could. Mm-hmm. I said, well, I can, but he said, you will be singing with the Marine Corps. With the Marine Band, it's really very difficult to sing because the Marine Corps is standing behind you.
Mm-hmm. And it's loud.
And they play the same way all the time.
Right.
So they don't feel, they don't even listen to the singer. The singer has to listen to them. It was very difficult, but I did it, and it was a great success, and I even got a kiss from George Bush, the president.
Icing on the cake.
So we kissed twice, and then I kissed him third time, and I said, this is Russian style. And he said, oh, I love that.
Before we run out of time, would you read to us?
Oh, yes. I would love to read the prologue to my book, which is an original poem.
Okay.
And it gave the name to the book. I simply have to fall in love with something or somebody. It may be cloud, it may be dove, a soul or a body, a twinkling star in stormy night, a tender voice from heaven, a touch of blessing in twilight when poems pour in 7, a sheet of paper, blank and white, which I will stain with letters, or my next dream, which brings delight, and that is all that matters.
That's Beautiful. You also collaborate with a composer.
Yes, Viktor Agranovich is my composer. He's also a jazz player, and we did a lot of projects together. I even had to write Russian texts to jazz melodies. But he wrote about 20 songs on my poetry, and we did a CD which embraced 12 best ones.
Now, where can you find the book?
The book is, so, as I said, you can get it in Barnes & Noble and Amazon.
Okay. So, Marina, I have one more question to ask you. Can you tell me, you're the editor of Marina magazine. Can you tell me exactly what that is?
Yes, this is a literary journal. It is published in New York. And the authors are, it is in Russian. It is a Russian journal, very thick. It's a quarterly. We have 4 issues a year, and now we are in the 5th year.
Wow.
The editor-in-chief is David Guy, also a writer, and I am on the board, and I am doing the editing of the texts. It's a very interesting journal. Because we publish not only poetry and prose, but we also do publications in all sorts of things and translations into Russian from different languages.
You are quite accomplished, and it has been my pleasure to sit here and talk with you today. Thank you, Marina, so much for joining me. And thank you all for joining us as well at Your Source TV. This is Eva Sorzi, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Я всегда с тобой и в одиночестве.